Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Matt, and this is Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit, your beacon of freedom and the American way of life. Tune in every Friday for a new episode as we dive into the world of liberty and what makes our country great. All right, guys, welcome back. This is Eric and Matt here, and we've got another great podcast for you here of Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit. Welcome back. I do apologize in advance. One of our previous episodes, we had a couple of audio issues, and we ended up determining that was a faulty microphone cable. We've since got that fixed. So let us know if you hear any other audio anomalies, and we'll be sure to fix that. So in today's podcast, we are going to be getting into talk of tyranny.
That's right.
So
tyrannical and tyrannists.
Yeah. Before we get too far in today's episode, I'd like to give a thanks to the show's patron sponsor, WeTheProcessor.com. They are a staunchly pro-freedom and pro-2A card processor. No monthly fees, low rates. You don't ever have to worry about being terminated or canceled by your current processor for what you sell. Check them out at WeTheProcessor.com. So let's get into this a little bit. So, I think with everything going on in our country right now, you see this political unrest, you see this really random environment where people are really torn, right? Just on their overall attitudes, not only towards each other, but towards the government and towards policy and, this side of the political spectrum, that side of the political spectrum, and everyone's got an opinion. And people are so quick to just be extremely biased and have their own unique biases against others, which we're only human, but we see a very deadly set of consequences that are unfolding in front of us, where it just seems that people have lost touch with what makes us so good and what makes this country such a great place to live in and what makes the American experiment such a unique one, and that makes the lives that we all have collectively, we've got it pretty good overall compared to a lot of other places in the world that have had a government system or have been a country, let's just say, a lot longer than we have. So they've had plenty of time to screw things up.
Yeah, and when you think about it, there's over 180 different countries in the world, and you can truly say that America is the best place on earth that you want to live. And those that don't think so have, quite honestly, haven't had the opportunity to experience the true tyranny that exists outside of the U.S. And everybody has their woes about what's going on in the current political climate, but we're going to talk today about where it could go and also what's currently being experienced in other countries, other first world countries. We're not talking like dirt floor countries. We're talking first world countries with infrastructure, and this is where it could go.
That's right. And when we look at, the overall political environment that has existed amongst men and amongst countries and governments, we could certainly go down a very titanic rabbit hole of crazy consequences there because we've been at it a long time as human beings. So, of course, if we were to go really far back in history, there are plenty of situations where obviously human rights were most certainly a secondary thought process for a lot of governments, okay? The health and welfare of the citizenry was most certainly a secondary, if not worse, consideration. So we won't necessarily look at, when I say historical, I mean, definitely several hundred or thousand years ago, a long time ago. We're mainly talking about stuff that exists within the stratum of our world right now as we see it. And, let's talk about Myanmar.
So before we get into Myanmar, potato, we first have to provide context of what is tyranny, like what constitutes tyranny.
Thank you. Yeah,
so,
forgot about that.
Well, in this particular episode, it's important because some people think that tyranny is relative. It's not. There's a physical definition for it of what it is. And according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, one of the most prolific dictionaries online, as some would say, the first definition is an act or the pattern of harsh, cruel, and unfair control over other people. So that's the first definition. And the second definition is a government in which all power is in the hands of a single ruler. So those are your two definitions of tyranny, and you can use them in every single example that we're going to use today.
It's very unique, I think, the way our country has turned out, because we have such a interesting relationship with tyranny as a country, and it may not really be in the living memory of as many people because the revolution was, certainly some years ago, and there may not be as many people alive that were directly, related to what happened or were involved in it directly. But Americans as a whole, we do have a very big concern about tyranny because, we experienced it, and our country's not perfect. We've been through some, struggles in the past, and, there are certainly some things that have happened in our nation amongst different ethnic groups that, I'm sure many people are not proud of. All we can do is try to learn from that and move forward from it, right? And that doesn't mean that anything that might have happened is okay. I mean, we look at like the Trail of Tears and, the prosecution of the Indians and what the United States government did to the Indian population. We look at things like Black Wall Street. We look at the Civil War. We look at, slavery and that whole dark stain on our past, which is very terrible. And of course, those are horrible things, and we hate to talk about them because you think, oh man, it sucks. But I think one unique thing about our country and about the way that a lot of our people think, not all of them, because right now people are definitely, running around with blinders on, right? But I think that the way we approach things is we're not afraid to look at our past and go, okay, this happened and this is terrible, but here's how we're not going to make this happen again, right? Like we have at least enough of a forward-thinking type of regimen in terms of that. So I think that's one thing that makes us unique is that, we've experienced tyranny. We came here to flee from tyranny. I guess I'd be like a 7th or 8th generation American. I think my family came here in 1820. So we haven't been here since the real early days, but we've been here since 1820 is the earliest record I can find of my family here. So I'd like to think we're a little vested at this point.
Just a little bit.
But it's one of those things that, it is a little bit weird to think about. The past can be scary, but I do truly in my heart believe that we do have the ability to look at the past and go, okay, this is what we're not going to do to people anymore. We're going to move past this, right? And that could even be all the way from like the suffrage movement with women's voting rights, all the way to, there was a time in this country where, a black man wasn't free. There was a time in this country when a black man couldn't own a firearm. There was a time in this country when a woman couldn't vote. There was a time in this country where women were just considered, below men in every way in society. And now we see the society we live in where women own very, famous and popular businesses. They're CEOs of companies and they're heads of marketing at companies, and they're going out on their own and making these, great livings for themselves and their families and things like that. And then, we've gone all the way from having men in chains to now everyone has an equal opportunity to, become a famous football player or a rapper or a movie star or run a successful business or become a doctor or a lawyer or an astrophysicist, right? So America is a unique country in that we have lifted up our citizenry in ways that the rest of the world is, quite frankly, quite jealous of. You look at the illegal immigration and the amount of people that want to come here, legally or illegally, no matter how you cut it. I mean, a lot of people want to come to the U.S. because they know that this is the birthplace of freedom, that, we foster and grow personal liberties, at least the people do. Now, we won't talk about the government as much, but,
It's true. You'll be hard-pressed to find someone that says, I'm leaving America because I don't like it here. Yeah. It just doesn't. Plenty of people will say it. But,
they'll threaten.
Yeah, they'll threaten. But when it comes down to it, there's no other country that you want to be living in. Maybe you can retire, your buck will go a little bit farther in another country, but here in the U.S., this is where you want to be at.
Yeah, so let's go down the road of tyranny in other parts of the world. And really the reason that we sort of preface this podcast in the way that we have And also, big thanks to those of you tuning in on our YouTube channel. There's a very good possibility you also see this in YouTube form over on Iraq Veteran 8888. If you'd rather stream this on your YouTube channel and maybe listen, you're welcome to do that as well. But some of you are listening on the podcast, and we appreciate that. Others of you are on YouTube. No matter where you're following us, I felt like it was important to preface this podcast with that information. Like, look, we're recognizing here, we're proud to be Americans. We love this country. You know, I consider myself to be a patriot, and I love everybody in this country as much as I can. And, you know, and I want freedom equally for every single man, woman, and child and everything in between in this country. I truly want people to be happy. One more little thing before we jump into this tyranny thing and talking about tyranny in other parts of the world. Also, we can define tyranny, but why don't we also define patriotism? I mean, what is patriotism to you? What is patriotism to me? I'm not going to give the Webster, definition, but my definition of patriotism is you've got to love your country and the people in it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to worship the government or police or military or the government in general or politicians especially, right? These people that society props up to be their leaders, our elected representatives. I'm not saying that's not an important job that needs to be looked at with a certain amount of finesse there, but I think that patriotism at its core is more about caring about the people around you more than you care about the system. The country is comprised of people, and those people are your country, right? A flag, an American flag, is just a symbol. It represents something, right? So for me, when I think about patriotism, I think about, I don't worship the government. I don't worship policies. I don't worship laws. I don't worship law enforcement. I don't worship soldiers necessarily, but I worship more about who we are, our identity and what we've accomplished and who we are. And I care about personal liberty. Like, to me, natural rights are on the crux of patriotism. Patriotism is about loving what your country stands for, loving your country, but that not being necessarily exclusive to government officials or to some code or system, but more to a people and what they represent as a whole.
That's a very in-depth explanation of what patriotism means to you.
Right.
Mine is very short. Mine is very concise. It's not so much love for a specific flag. It's a love of your country and a love and respect for the sacrifices that everybody made to make it what it is. So when I think of why do you stand for the flag, I think of, all of the people that sacrificed their livelihoods to make the country what it is and to keep it free. Think back to the guys from, the Revolutionary War. They gave up everything. Think about how many people would be willing to do that right now. If, if something went down, how many people are willing to accept that they're going to walk out the door and leave their wife and child at home while they go and try to sacrifice their life to make sure that their family has somewhere safe to grow up? Very, very, very few people would be willing to make that sacrifice now.
You're right.
I mean, to put it in kind of the hardships they had to endure and the acceptance of that wife to say, I understand. Just, go do what you have to do.
I think that it's also important for me to just clarify as well that, I'm certainly on the same, plane with Matt there. I mean, I most certainly respect our military that has sacrificed so much. I mean, we've been on the receiving end of that. We know what it's like to sacrifice and be away from your family and things like that. So I didn't want to make it sound like I don't care about law enforcement or military. Just that the worship, the whole hero worship doesn't necessarily mean that, that's not necessarily a requirement to be patriotic and love your country. I'm just
not at all.
Yeah.
No, and I don't think we're in a position where everybody has to understand that.
You have to paint things out though, because you don't
true.
want people, trying to think that you don't appreciate the police or military. I mean, believe me, they do have an integral, important task within society. I'm not saying there's not a place for what, we obviously need. I mean, that's, we need law enforcement, we need military. I mean, we need those things, but that loving your country doesn't necessarily have to be exclusively
Well, what I was explaining was not so much just the military, but just people in general, farmers that gave up their farms, business owners that gave up their businesses to, try to preserve the American way or even establish the American way of life, and just acknowledging, all of the things that took place and saying you have to have a certain level of respect to make sure that you're not, disrespecting.
Oh, believe me, I'm lucky to receive the gifts. Okay, I'm certain. I know that the world I live in and what is here today is a gift to me, right? And I don't take those sacrifices 1 second for granted. Okay, Matt and I have both served, so we know. Anyway, so all right, now that we have established how much we love America and how great this place
America,
is, right?
Right.
Exactly. So let's get into some examples of tyranny around the world and just kind of compare that to, the way we live, and certainly use these as stark warnings about, how we don't want things to, turn out like that here.
That's right. And, one of the big things, I know you wanted to touch on Myanmar first, right?
We can.
Myanmar being the most current of the tyrannical examples, and that's what you're seeing now is, we've all, I can't say we've all heard it in the news, but some news outlets are reporting it more than others. You're starting to see videos pop up of, just the army like killing civilians. It's terrible. And, I hate to say that's a disarmed populace, like in a nutshell. So, you're starting to see more and more of that take place. First, Myanmar's always been a hotbed because of like Burma and Myanmar, and they've gone through a couple of changes, and they've never really been able to establish themselves. Then now you have a military coup d'etat going on, and you just have the entire army going through and enforcing their will.
So the military has essentially overthrown the government?
Yes.
Is what's going on?
Well, funny thing about Myanmar was always a authoritarian country. It was disguised as a democratic country, so that way that all the other countries would kind of accept it. They see what happens when you join the Axis. It's you do get shunned, you get sanctioned, and they're already a fledgling country, very small, trying to get started. They don't need the sanctions, they don't need the tariffs and the regulations. So they kind of played democracy until now, and the military's always been in charge over there.
Right.
They were just pulling strings.
Well, I saw a video the other day of a gentleman in a courtyard trying to run away from a whole group of Myanmarese police soldiers, whatever, and I don't know if they were firing live ammunition, but I don't know. One ricochet off the wall there sure looked like a live bullet to me. So it is really scary. So, there is a stark contrast. Here in the United States, we have the right to bear arms, and the Second Amendment is extremely important to us. And, so many people, I believe, don't really value the brilliance of our founding fathers and how wise they were to enshrine the right of the citizenry to protect themselves in such a distinct and clear way. The verbiage of the Second Amendment is extremely clear and concise, and it means exactly what it means. Right? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay. That's very important. Shall not be infringed. The most clear language, the most clear constitutional language. We look at tyranny in the context of this podcast, but infringement is literally like that's the child of tyranny is going to be your rights being infringed on in some way. So in Myanmar, they do not have an enshrined capability within their codified government to protect themselves and to own firearms. So,
and even if they did, it wouldn't mean much to the guy doing the coup. He's just going to roll up in tanks and vehicles like they did in the video with the lady working out, the kind of the meme video where she didn't realize what was going on in the background. But you're absolutely right. There is no hardwired fail-safe in place for them. What I will say is that they have experienced quite a bit of war in that country, and there is a militia that lives out in the mountainous areas, and they're actually fighting back. So like there's been in the news, they can't go past a certain point because there is a militia of fighters and then they're pushing them back, and they're able to, repress any type of approach. And that's kind of that argument that's like, oh, well, what can you do against an army? Well, that's one example, and there's quite a few others as well.
Well, I've got an article pulled up here from BBC International News. And, here in the U.S., one thing that I will make mention of that I think we're very guilty of is that Americans tend to have their head buried in the sand and not necessarily get involved too much in what is going on in the rest of the world. And so much to the degree that there are endless internet memes regarding, the way that Americans tend to be very ignorant of other parts of the world. I mean, and I'm sure that other countries are guilty about not knowing anything about us either, or assuming things about Americans that the media or their local government or whatever has told them to believe. And of course, they have an opinion based on that. In fact, so much so that that's one reason that we've wound up in the situation that we're in with certain countries hating us so much, is because they just really don't know who we really are. All they know is what they've been told by their peers. And of course, they're scared to death of us. So there is a lot of that propaganda that goes on in general, but I would say that we're certainly guilty of it, but we tend to not really pay attention to what's going on in the world as much. So this BBC article is from, let's see, this one was published back in January here of 2020. So not a terribly recent article, but I just wanted to mention that, like in Myanmar, for instance.
Yep.
Here we've got a photo from August 2017 that shows an attack on the indigenous Muslims in Myanmar.
Yep.
So another thing about the U.S., we have freedom of religion. So you can believe what you want, right? So here, just because someone's a Christian or Jew or Muslim or they're agnostic or whatever their religion is, there's so many different things that someone could believe if you're Buddhist or whatever your belief system is. We applaud and appreciate and promote that people have different religious principles to each other, and we live and we coexist and cohabitate peacefully, and while encouraging our fellow citizens to appreciate that, their ability to choose whatever religion they want. This country was founded partially on the concept of us fleeing a tyrannical government that was trying to, tell us what to believe, and, you weren't this type of Christian, so we're going to send you away or whatever. So, we were founded on religious persecution.
Yeah, that's exactly the reason that, they came across, was because they were being persecuted religiously. And,
right.
On that part, or on that note, I mean, if you think about it, America is very, very tolerant and accepting of all religions. That's why they brought, so much so that you start to see stuff like the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Yes, it's a joke, and
or
everybody,
the Church of Scientology.
Yeah, everybody knows. Well, yeah, those guys are a different class of. I wouldn't even consider them a religion. That's a business. But the Flying Spaghetti Monster thing, that was a joke. That was so that a celebrity could take a picture on their driver's license with the strainer on their head. But the fact that it's actually legitimate, quote, legitimate and accepted religion, so you could do that, is just an example of the acceptance and the tolerance that America has for religion.
That's right. But you look at what these citizens are going through. One thing I will acknowledge, and I think that it's important to mention here in this video, is, a lot of Americans have this phobia against Muslims. Okay. Mm-hmm. And, call it, this war on terror, or you look at all of this stuff. I'm not going to get into the politics of that because I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers, but let's just say that no matter what you believe politically, or no matter what you believe about a given group of people, a lot of Americans have this phobia against Muslim populations. So when you look at other parts of the world, we're actually going to talk about some examples that are happening in China here in a little bit. But now in Myanmar, I've got this article pulled up and talking about this Muslim population that, is obviously persecuted because of their religious beliefs. Okay. Now, whether or not you like that type of religious belief, or if you're a devout Catholic or Christian or whatever, I think it's important to put that crap aside and just look at it from a human rights perspective. Okay. If you scroll down in the on the site there, Matt, and look at the photos. So there's a photo of these villages right near each other. The government could have burned down the entire village, but one section of the village there is intact and pristine, while the other section is reduced to ashes, and that was where the Muslim population and the political descendants of the country live in that area.
Yep.
And it's scary when you look at that and you compare it to, like here, Black Wall Street. And if you guys aren't familiar with the firebombing and everything that occurred with Black Wall Street, I mean, that's American history. You guys need to know it, right? This is an example of what not to do. So you can be a white person or a person, basically anyone that's not a black person, right? You could literally be that person and understand that your history isn't just black history, white history, this people, that people. No, American history is American history. Just like I want to read about General Custer and what happened, at Custer's last stand, right? I want to learn about the battles in the Civil War. I want to learn about the Revolutionary War, whatever. It's also important to know the negative things like the Trail of Tears and Wounded Knee and all the situations with Indians, but then also Black Wall Street. And that's the exact type of thing that is happening in Myanmar to this day, right now, right? That happened in our country, 100 years ago with Black Wall Street.
It's true, and it really puts it in perspective when you see everything that's going on in the U.S. It pales in comparison to some of the world events going on. Now, America, we do have our own issues, and we're working through those issues right now. But most certainly, they're not mass rape and genocide and just killing of civilians. I think Myanmar just reported 77 civilians were just gunned down by the Myanmar army just for congregating and protesting. They got killed, like right in the street, like dogs. It's unfortunate, and we definitely don't have that going on in the U.S.
Right, but that's an example, like in Myanmar, that that's stuff that's happened here, and I'd like to think we've moved past it and it's not going to happen again. But I pulled up on my phone there. Matt's got some information. If you just want to quickly talk about Black Wall Street.
Yeah, so Black Wall Street, you mentioned, was officially known as the Tulsa Race Massacre. Happened from May 31st, 1921 to June 1st, 1921. So the article states the Tulsa Race Massacre took place on May 31st and June 1st, so not through, but on those 2 days, 1921, when mobs of white residents, many of them deputized and given weapons by city officials, attacked black residents and businesses of the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So literally deputized to go in and just destroy any racist city. Successful black city.
Earlier, we defined patriotism, right? Well, for me, I would never want any harm to befall my fellow citizens, right? So now that was 100 years ago. Okay, so I know it was a long time ago, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't remember that those things happen and then think, okay, how can we avoid these situations from happening in the future? And, I'm not saying we've been perfect over the years, but, I think we've come a long way from that. I mean, you definitely don't see that kind of stuff happening anymore. I would not want to see my fellow citizens get hurt in any way. So I could not imagine being in a either political environment or just a position in life as an American to go, you know what? These people are successful. We hate them, so we're going to firebomb the city. I mean, that is a pretty freaking crazy way of thinking compared to the way things are now.
Yeah, and, with the advent of technology, it is making that more and more easily accessible. So one, you're able to go back and read about this. This is something that, say, if you 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, you would have had to go to the library to specifically look for this subject in a book and read about it. You didn't have the ability to just pull it up and learn all this information at your fingertips. So that's one benefit that, our kids and the next generation are going to have, that they can pull up these facts right in front of them.
I think that's very important. So let's pivot off of Myanmar, and we probably want to talk, and oddly enough, now this country, when I mention the name of it, you're going to be like, what? You mentioned this country? All right, so we're going to kind of go in order, maybe not necessarily in order, but the first two examples, Myanmar and Canada.
Polar opposites.
Oh, yeah, polar opposites, definitely. But you would think, when you think Canada, at least me, now I'm sure some people are going to hate on this, but When I think Canada, I basically just think, people are going to hate me for saying this. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get ready for the hate. To me, Canada is like our cousins or brothers. Like, you know, they're us, really. Like, we're all on the same continent, right? You know, we're all buddies, right? I mean, I've never met a Canadian that was a person I didn't like. And, you know, so we were allies back in the wars. We fought together. We died together. We occupy the same piece of land. We all get along. Well, after a while, you sort of start looking at the world in a holistic approach and less about, I mean, yeah, I'm proud to be an American, but does that mean that if a Canadian came down here that his, you know, grandpa fought in the same war mine did? I mean, I'm pretty sure if our grandparents got along, we can get along. And after a while, you kind of start thinking, well, yeah, they got a different government. They've got a different, you know, thing going on up there. But at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure that on some, let's just say, global front, right? Say that we found out someone was going to invade Canada and hurt them. Wouldn't you kind of feel like you had like a patriotic sense of, or that you had a patriotic duty to protect Canada?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like when you feel the Canadian national anthem, do you not, you know, when you hear it, don't you kind of, you get a little fuzzy too. It's like, it's like they're our friends, you know, like you kind of feel like you want to take care of them.
Like a stepbrother.
Yeah.
Like a stepbrother.
We're like stepbrothers.
Yeah.
That's okay, right? You know, but do you think for one second that if somebody wasn't attacking Canada, wouldn't you just have this thought go through you or this feeling like, I have to go help these people? Like, you wouldn't just sit by and let somebody
America
hurt them.
be chomping at the bits. They'd be like, let's go.
Like, open the gates. We're coming.
Let's go.
Let the American dogs out of the cage and let us come tear them up. You know, like, and that's just how we're wired, right? And I feel like we're more of the same people than people give Canada and the U.S. credit for. Like, come on, we get along.
Yeah,
right?
But they are going. I mean, when you look at Canada as a country, they're very progressive on the left, meaning it's like looking into the future of where America is heading. Like if you just want an outline of what the policies are trying to go for, look at Canada. Canada is a great example of that. Like universal health care, draconian gun laws, just
travel
restrictions, mandates. I mean, everything that we're heading towards is that it's crazy.
So Justin Trudeau is definitely in the crazy end of the spectrum in terms of where things could get. You would look at our current administration and our current government and think, is it possible to go further left? I think you'd look at Justin Trudeau and there's, that's your answer. He definitely can. So some areas that we can draw a stark and distinctive contrast between the U.S. and Canada, or let's look at more of the comparisons as ways that we're close. Well, you can own firearms in Canada. Now some firearms fall into a much stricter classification that it is extremely difficult to get all of the licensing in order to have certain types of firearms. I know at one point they were trying a very long and arduous long gun registration scheme up in Canada, but they wound up dropping the long gun registry in Canada because it was too expensive and laborious and too much paperwork for them to do. So they finally said, you know what, we're going to drop the idea, and they quit messing around with the long gun registry.
Yeah, it ran millions.
There are not as many guns in Canada as the U.S. by a long shot, but Canadians, it's very clear, especially in the rural areas, they most certainly love their firearms just like we do here. So there are many instances where you look at Canada. Yeah, I mean, we're obviously both modern countries with very modern infrastructure and, governments, and just the overall way we run our countries isn't too much different. And then the people that occupy those countries are pretty close in terms of our overall morals and principles and everything that we all collectively look at as being important to our lives and our communities. I mean, we're pretty similar people. So why, all right, I guess at this part we would ask, why would Canada fall into the tyranny boat? And why would that be recently? Well, I mentioned briefly the coronavirus travel restrictions are extremely strict in Canada and also in the news right now. All right, what'd you see about the church?
Yeah, the police were going in to try to shut down the Easter Sunday celebration, and good for that preacher or pastor to kick them out. He basically was like, just leave.
Yeah.
And then he had some choice words for him there at the end.
It's scary.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We're not going to say what those words were, but you should go watch that video of the pastor kicking the Canadian police out of his church up there on Easter Sunday. It's quite moving. And the other thing about it too is, so then later on we saw a story. This popped up just, I believe, a week after Easter, and maybe not a week and a half after Easter, and they wound up putting chain link fence around the church to keep people out. And because of coronavirus, distance restrictions and things that are very harsh penalties and harsh restrictions that they have in Canada compared to here. But then you begin to see all these videos popping up on social media and memes and things. And what do you see but this video of this little girl that can't be 5 years old. And there's a sign that says, you got to keep out of the playground, playground closed, and there's tape all around it. And she is kicking the sign out of defiance because she's so angry about that she can't go. Even a child understands, well, there's no one here. Like, I'm the only person at the park. What does it matter if I go play on the swing set, right? But it shows that the disdain for all of this corona crap going on is certainly, in a lot of people's minds. Even a 6-year-old can understand the concept of, hey, well, I want my freedom, and you're denying something of me that shouldn't be denied, right? So that's one example, for sure, is their extreme lockdowns. And then you also see the videos and memes and everything floating around from some of the Canadian cities where they've imposed these really strict curfews. And you got people out violating curfew. They're shooting fireworks in the road, and they're building bonfires, and they're singing Kumbaya, and they're playing and hanging out and having fun, cooking hot dogs in the evening to defy the curfews.
That's right. And that's what it comes down to, is civil disobedience in these instances. That's really the only way that you can really show en masse that you're not going to comply. Canada is interesting because I've lived in Canada, and I lived in Toronto. It was a very fun place to live, but you did see some of those authoritarian, tyrannical laws. They don't have the freedom of speech. So it is perfectly plausible for you to be in Canada, voice your opinion about a political leader or a local politician, and they can come and arrest you because you don't have those protections. These are things that a lot of people take for granted here in the U.S. And even myself, I'll go when I'm traveling, you don't realize that you have to speak a certain way and act a certain way in order to be safe. From the government, not from the local populace, from the government. So
what you said earlier really, it clicked with me big time when you mentioned, when you were talking about Canada and everything and all of the restrictions, but you also, I believe you mentioned that you get a little bit of a glimpse in the future as to what could happen here and how far things could go down the rabbit hole here. And I think that that's a fair and astute observation, that yes, things could certainly be worse here, and that is a little bit of a glimpse as to, at least the closest thing of what could happen here quicker than all of the rest of the tyranny going on in the other parts of the world.
Because we're in the same continent, our landscapes are very similar. The temperature might be different. Honestly, the summers in Toronto get into the 90s as well. So the only difference would be winter. But it really does frighten me because you look at the way that their political landscape is going.
And don't they sleep with polar bears and
they do the polar plunge, which is about all I know about on that. But it is very scary.
Absolutely. So, all right, we've got, and it's very odd to have Canada on this list, but I wanted to kind of provoke some thought with you guys and make you think a little bit different. That, hey, it's a little closer than you might actually think. We won't talk about all the corruption that goes on down in Mexico. That's another.
Well, that's a good point because, and I'm not going to touch on that, but that reminded me when you said Mexico about there's a ton of illegal immigrants coming across the border right now from all countries around the world. You don't really see a ton of those going up to Canada. It's like if America was such a bad place to live, why aren't we also just a pass through?
And you don't see them coming through Canada.
Yeah, you don't see them
coming.
Canada. Yeah, you don't. So I mean, it's really one of those things where everybody wants to be here. It just kind of just reinforces our initial thoughts.
So let's change gears a little bit, Matt.
Yep.
And why don't we talk a little bit about North Korea?
Ooh, I know about North Korea.
So North Korea is a unique place in that it is one of the last places on earth that is still a complete, totalitarianism government. Where, basically you have a dictator, essentially, is what we're looking at. So a dictatorship, they wield tyranny. Okay, so the idea of tyranny we defined earlier, keep that in the back of your mind. Well, who can carry out tyranny, right? So we've seen that our own citizens have the ability to carry out tyranny against each other, like when you look at the situation in Black Wall Street, and that's terrible. We've seen that our governments are capable of carrying out tyranny. Obviously, you look at the Indians who were treated like crap from the federal government and treated terribly and murdered and killed and all this. So we see that governments as a whole, or a government bureaucracy within a government, can certainly be capable of carrying out tyranny on its own civilians. So you got the citizens against each other, the government against the citizens, and then obviously we look at the Revolutionary War and we had the
government.
We had the government against another government that is trying to apply tyranny to us, being a colony. So there's that. And then the people versus the government, which one could certainly understand that our country was founded, very largely in part by, brave men and women, civilians that were stood up to tyranny.
That's right.
So, but what about absolute tyranny? And that's what North Korea is. It is absolute tyranny. It is a dystopian landscape that's living in the 50s. If you look at their architecture, even all the buildings, a lot of their weapons, vehicles, lots of things. It's like getting in a time machine and going back into the 50s. They are living under a dictatorship.
You see that in, I know we're talking about North Korea, but you see that in Cuba as well because they got cut off. So like when you go to Cuba, it's like all like old school 1950s and 60s cars and older. North Korea, interestingly enough, is all 1970s Volvos.
Nice.
Because they ordered a bunch of Volvos in the 70s and they never paid for them.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, they got delivered and they never paid the check.
So when we look at a dictatorship in terms of North Korea, I know that in popular culture, especially in recent years, it seems that the lens has been over North Korea probably a little more than anywhere else, and that's popular culture as well. That's like, you look at these movies that have come out, and all of the other things related to it. I think that people have taken a little bit of a closer look at North Korea as a result of popular culture and all of the sort of the cult, popular cult-like, association that people have with Kim Jong-un as being this charismatic and very enigmatic. I can't say that word. That type of figure. So, what are some of the things now? Getting beyond the pop culture reference, let's look at Korea for what it is. So they do some pretty terrible things to their citizenry.
Absolutely, they use food as a method of controlling the population. So, when you start thinking about, you have to do certain things, otherwise you won't get your daily ration. There's been, they force labor camps. They have no hesitation about killing an entire generation of families. And that's really that fear factor of like, hey, if you do something wrong, we're going to kill you and your entire bloodline. They will literally wipe out your entire bloodline.
So essentially, you have a government that wields power with an iron fist and literally subjugates the citizens in the worst ways possible. And using torture, murder, coercion, prison, forced labor, starvation, no telling what, a denial of resources, a denial of basic human rights to frighten you to the point where you feel like if you don't worship a photo of this man on the wall, that he's going to hear you, that Big Brother's listening, and that they're going to seek you out and hurt you. And that has to be a terrible, terrible way to live. The citizens of North Korea, most of them, now in recent years, they've had a little bit more access to the outside world through the internet and through email and a few bits of correspondence, cell phones. Certain party members and certain people within the government have been a little more lax on letting the outside world in a little bit. That's changed a bit in recent years. However, up for a really long time, and even to this day, most citizens in North Korea are very disconnected from the outside world and they don't know what's really going on in the rest of the world, and they're very isolated.
Everybody jokes around about, how they have like the weirdest facts, like Kim Jong-un was the only player to ever, get a hole-in-one on every single hole of a golf course. But those aren't jokes. Like, they truly believe that. That's what's indoctrinated into them starting from a young age. So when you have an entire country that's been indoctrinated that way, that they only know how to comply.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah.
So that's a completely different level of tyranny done by completely different people in a much harsher way. So tyranny can come in a lot of different forms, and this example of tyranny we arrive at, gets you more akin into the idea of the government having a total control and the citizenry not having a lot they can do about it. Now, there have been a lot of North Koreans that have fled successfully and have left the country and gotten away. Of course, the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea is still active now at the 38th parallel.
Active war.
And it is still an active war, technically on paper, an active war. And, there are pop shots that are taken and little incidents that happen probably on a semi-regular basis that don't get reported.
They do. They die. Like, soldiers die all the time on the shooting back and forth.
I shouldn't say they don't get reported. They do get reported to the chain of command, but you don't see it on the news. Mm-hmm. They keep that pretty quiet. But despite that, North Korean citizens have escaped to South Korea to seek asylum and have been granted that asylum. I know for a while they were sending people back, but I think now the policy in South Korea is that they will, obviously, if a North Korean wants to escape and seek asylum, they will grant said asylum.
For the most part. I haven't heard about them sending anybody back because I guess that's their most valuable intelligence on, what's going on in the country, which is how the world even knows what's going on, because they're not going to tell you what's going on, but these defectors are getting out. And I guess to corroborate the story between the defectors, the people that haven't defected yet are still in North Korea. They haven't heard the news, and they're most certainly not going to broadcast the news, so they're completely in the dark.
Right.
When they defect, their story matches the previous defector that already spilled the beans, but there's no way that they could have known the same story. So the fact that all of these stories that are from these defectors are all the same is like, well, this is what's going on. So,
well, that's also how we wind up knowing that some of them do have access to certain types of information, and that net has been loosened maybe a tiny amount.
Yeah.
It's also interesting is the infrastructure. In North Korea, very few people own vehicles. Only the most connected, wealthy, political elite, have vehicles. Okay. You'll almost never see any traffic on the roads because there's no vehicles in private hands. And honestly, when you look at a lot of the footage and everything in the cities, you don't see this bustling metropolis, full of people. The cities are almost usually pretty deserted. And it's like, so where are the people? Those are government cities where only the people in the government live there, and you're basically just looking at government employees walking around everywhere.
A lot of it is staged. And again, I've never been to North Korea, but I've seen a ton of documentaries, like behind the scenes documentaries, leaked footage. I'm half Korean, so that part of me is very intrigued on that. So, I mean, a lot of it is staged, and a lot of the people live out in the wilderness. I mean, when you look at North Korea from a satellite image, you literally see like two lights. And it's like right in the middle of Pyongyang, and then everything else, the entire country is black. So it puts it in perspective. Their infrastructure is like none.
It's pretty scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
So do we want to move on, maybe talk about China a little bit?
Yeah.
Or is there anything about North Korea you think we need to visit?
No. Well, I mean, other than the fact that, you could say that everything is kind of sanctioned and they're not getting the same, like they're limited on what they can import and export because of their communist status. Their number one export right now are people. So they're exporting forced labor camps to like Russia and China to help build out their infrastructure. So you'll go and see they'll just make a camp in the middle of the woods in Russia, cut down the timber by hand, and just start putting it on a rail station. And these are North Korean like forced labor camps.
That's
and
scary.
Yeah, you see the same thing with China. The only reason I brought that up is because the only people they trade with are other communist countries like Russia and China. Yeah. But China does the same thing. So when you start getting into this tyrannical government, like it could be so much worse. But when you look at like Marxism, communism, and everybody says, well, that's not the right way to do it, but it's never been successfully done. So why, what the end result is going to be. It's like you see it in stages going across the gamut on the map. So,
well, I guess that depends on what your definition of successful is. Yeah. I mean, like when we say,
true.
Well, there's never been a successful version of communism, when then you look at what's going on over there, and they've been communists for quite a while. And I mean, so I guess it depends on how low your moral compass goes, because
relative, huh?
Yeah, if you don't care about people being happy, and you don't care about human rights violations, and you don't care about people being under the thumb of tyranny, well then, I guess you would consider it successful. But I would say the principle and moralistic success would certainly be a questionable thing to consider at best. So
something that China does very well.
Yeah. So, we mentioned in Myanmar where they were, hurting Muslims in their country. Well, China in recent news, this isn't from too long ago, they were involved in mass detention and murderous situations of their own their own Muslim populations called Uyghurs?
It's pronounced Uyghurs.
Uyghurs.
Yep. Uyghurs.
Okay. I did not know that.
Yep. It's spelled with the U.
Yeah, Uighurs.
Pronounced with the
with a we. Okay, that's a very strange word. But anyway, when you look at their Muslim population, I mean, they're talking about, giving the women birth control and forcing abortions and all kind of crazy stuff because they don't like that part of the population.
Yeah, no, dude, it is crazy what they're doing over there. I mean, it's legitimate. You can look this up. You can find articles, organ harvesting, forced sterilization. There's mass genocide, they're gang raping all of the women and their daughters. This is how terrible it is, man.
Wow.
Hold on. The daughter or the mother will be forced to help hold down the daughter while the prison guards go at it, and then knowing that she's going to be next. This is happening through the entire encampment. It's crazy.
Yeah, so that ethnic group of citizens represents almost 10% of China's citizenry. That's a lot of people. You know how many people there are in China? A lot.
Yeah.
What, 2 billion, 2.2 billion people, something like that?
Easily.
Like 1/3 of the country or the world's population's in China, something like that?
It's a crazy number. And, think about 10% is a very large number, considering it probably only took 1% of that to corral them.
It's crazy. That's scary.
Yep.
The thing, like, we're talking, 24-hour video and photo surveillance of that group in their country. I mean, you're talking, they pull them over in checkpoints and do all kind of terrible things, send them away to camps. I mean, it's very terrible what the Chinese government's doing to that group of people. And again, where it varies between that type of concept and here is that, we respect the freedom of religion, and we have, our country is codified and built on natural rights, right, of our citizens. And that is, holistically a very important thing in the hearts and souls of Americans, is that we care a lot about natural rights, and we want people to live free and be happy, or at least I would like to think the good people do. Now, there's probably certain people in this country that would take everything you have and leave you in a hole for dead if they had their choice. We're not talking about those people. I think the bulk of good people in this country want others to truly be happy and healthy and to live, lives that fill them full of joy and happiness, right?
would
Life,
like to
liberty,
believe
and
that.
the pursuit of happiness. It's literally what this podcast is named after, is the concept of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what this podcast is about our freedoms. So that's one area we're very different. You would never see something like this happen in the United States, especially imagine 10% of the population in the United States where, most of the government was like, okay, we're going to corral these people into a few states. And if they try to leave, we're going to do terrible things to them.
Good luck.
Scary.
But China has a running track record of oppression. I mean, they're communist by nature. First, let me back up. I did something that I shouldn't have done. Is I referred to China and assumed that they were all communists, but they're not. So just to be clear, just because you're in China or Chinese doesn't mean you're a card-carrying member of the People's Republic of China's Communist Party. You have to actually join that. So I want to correct that. The Communist Party of China have a long track record of oppression of their people. Before the Uyghurs, the most recent was the Falun Gong members. Basically, Falun Gong, they did the same thing. They would hunt them down. They would, torture them, kidnap them, kill them, and oppress them. And it was just a different belief system. So they don't allow that. I believe they don't allow Christianity either. So, when you start looking at their track record of oppression, what they're doing to the Uyghurs is definitely higher on that evil scale when it comes down to like forced labor and like mass gang rape, genocide, organ harvesting, all that kind of stuff. It's terrible.
I think it's also worth noting too that, like you mentioned, with Christianity, being banned a ton of places, right? Christians obviously have been persecuted in China as well over the years. I mean, it's not unique to any one ethnic group or any one religious group. Obviously, this Muslim region is going through some really tough times. And again, I will, say that, yes, there are situations in America where, people tend to have sort of a phobia against anyone who's not a Christian or anyone, especially who is a Muslim. I think that it's clear and important to recognize that if you care about human rights and liberty and freedom and religious freedom for all people, then you have to be upset when you see a group of people, no matter what their religious beliefs are, being put under such a terrible set of circumstances to have to live under. And I don't think anybody with half a brain or heart would disagree with that.
Yep.
You know?
And I will correct myself. Christianity is allowed in China.
It's allowed, but greatly frowned upon.
Yes, I would concur with this statement.
All right. Do we have time to do one more country? We've only got a few minutes left. Or do you want anything else you want to mention?
No,
about China?
we can squeeze one in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. We could.
We can do the third most recent, which would be Venezuela, which is still ongoing.
Yeah.
So
go ahead. Hit up on that.
Communist country. They were the wealthiest. I mean, these guys were like the Dubai of Latin America. I mean, they had so much oil. They had so much oil production. They had everything going for them. And then, communist countries are going to do what communist countries are going to do. And they said, hey, the people that know how to run all of these refineries and know how to get all the oil and make all the money, we're going to replace them with, state-sponsored people that are in high favor.
There's also a little bit of a way that you look into a tiny bit of a crystal ball with Venezuela as well, because you look at, I don't care what you believe or don't believe when it comes to the recent presidential election here in the United States, but there was all this talk of, fraud and cheating and things like that. No matter what you believe, I don't care what you believe what you want. But you look down there is a hotly contested, debate between who actually is the president of Venezuela. So you've got one group, I think the one guy that is the acting president of Venezuela, he preceded Hugo Chavez, who was the previous dictator, or what I guess might as well just call it what it is, right? I mean, an elected dictator, if that's a thing. But anyway, it just goes to show you the amount of fraud that goes into these environments as well, right? So the citizens do vote, but I think most people are really, they question the validity,
of course,
of who really was voted in.
Well, they have two presidents, which is kind of awkward,
Right?
I mean, it's one, you have like half of the countries recognize one president, and the other half of the countries didn't recognize the democratically elected president. So it kind of puts people in a weird position. Like, what do you do?
And then look at what's happening here. You got certain people that will just listen to anything Joseph Biden says, and then the other group of people can't wait for Trump's message to come from the office of the previous president.
Yeah.
So it's like that's their president. You know what I mean? And I'm not going to get into the minutia of who you support. I don't care who you support. Support who you want.
But support somebody.
But the thing about that, though, that's so funny, though, is when you look at that situation, I mean, half the country just refuses to think that the other guy's president and the other one isn't. So it's very similar to what's going on in Venezuela, if you think about it.
Yeah, and the fall from grace that those guys had was it's tragic. To go from somebody that's able to produce so much oil to create so many jobs and do infrastructure for their country, the fall from grace, and now these people they're burning money to keep warm. There's people looting and rioting just to feed their kids. This is what America could turn into.
Oh yeah.
Eventually. And
absolutely.
to say, and this is the example of, well, it would never happen in a modern day country. We just named like 3 countries.
Oh yeah.
that happened to.
It would probably, be good on your part to maybe do a little bit of research. I would look into the financial situation that's going on in Venezuela right now. It's actually really interesting reading. And there's some really good documentaries out there about people that take American dollars down to Venezuela and go shopping. It's like 2 million Bolivare, I think is what they call the Bolivares or whatever that they call the money system in Venezuela. But like 2 million of their dollars is only like 10 of ours.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous
and you have to carry
exchange.
around these humongous sums of the money. Like you've literally got a giant stack of money just to pay a cab driver or delivery man or to, buy a soda at a soda stand, and you got to divvy out like a half a stack of money.
Yep. Yeah, because they lost their credit rating and nobody wants to bank with them. No world banks will bank with them, so everybody's forced to use cash.
Yeah, and you go into a shop to buy something and it's just like brand X, there's like no competition. It's just a really strange environment.
What do you have today? Cabbage. I'll take 10. Like 10 cabbages, please.
Yep, that's scary. Or coffee rationing. Or you look at situations down there where they have to post armed soldiers up in the grocery stores to keep the grocery stores from getting raided. Yeah, that's scary. I mean, I would really hate to see that happen here, and I hope it would never happen here. But man, with the world events and things that are going on, you have to wonder where things could be headed, and what will happen if we don't stop it and try to fight against the people that are wanting this progressive globalism that they keep pushing. And they don't understand that the thing about globalism. Why don't you just look at the globe first and see, like, do you want to be a part of what is going on there, or do you want to be the best that we can be?
But see, that would make too much sense. Those are like the children that you can tell them, don't touch this. This is hot. You can see that it's hot. It's glowing red. It has heat mirage coming off of it. But the only way that child is going to be content is to touch that.
That's right.
And learn that it's hot. All the people calling for communism and socialism or Marxism, they see what it's capable of. They see how it always ends. But they're not going to be content with their life until they see it for their own eyes.
That's right. And then by then it's too late. Exactly. And I think that's the danger. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode on tyranny. There are certainly more examples and plenty of other countries that we didn't have time to get to in this particular podcast. But we appreciate you tuning in, and we hope that you'll, whether you're following us here on YouTube or over on the various podcasting apps, we appreciate you tuning in. And, this is a very different thing from Gun Gripes and some of the other political content that we do over on the Iraq Veteran 8888 channel. But Matt and I have our own perspective. Sometimes we disagree, and that's always healthy. But generally, I'd like to think that we try to approach things in the most honest way we can, and we try to be as straightforward with you guys as we possibly can here.
That's right.
And I want, life, liberty, and the pursuit for me, I think, with this podcast, for me, is more of a, I want this to be more personable, like, trying to remove, all of the random, extraneous opinions and just kind of dive into the minutia, if you will.
Yeah, to answer the questions that people have, but nobody really talks about.
That's right. I mean, we're not afraid to talk about any subject here, so if there's something you'd like to hear us do a podcast on, let me know, and we'll be happy to jump in there and give a bit of opinion, and, it's just our opinion. Take it for what you will.
Send those to info@ballisticink.com. We get tons of requests, and we kind of go through. If we see something that we like, then, we'll do an episode on it.
Hey, we really appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching and or listening. Live free, guys. Be happy. Have a great week, and we will see you next Friday.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Life, Liberty, and Pursuit. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else podcasts are found. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd really appreciate that. You can support us over on Ballistic Ink by picking yourself up some merch. And remember, guys, danger is freedom. Have a good one.